In this last component of this chapter, I'm going to be doing some things that really weren't in the chapter. I'm going to leave the rest that is in the chapter pretty much to you. Now, that includes how do you get a weighted average cost of capital for a privately held firm, a small business, so to speak. And then all of the hints as to here's what you do and here's what you don't do, some of which you may have noticed that as we worked our way through this, we ended up doing some of the things that they said you shouldn't do because there's no other option. So you get the best data that you can, and so as you wander your way through that and read the last chunks of the chapter, it's kind of interesting, and there's some of it that is really, really applicable, but some of it that is kind of more esoteric, and so I'm diverging from that to go back and pick up some concepts that we didn't fully develop in some earlier chapters, in two earlier chapters. The first one is valuation. This one we're going to look at valuing the entire firm, not just the equity per share, but the entire firm. How much is the entire firm worth, so to speak. So with that kind of introduction, let me talk a little bit about this. An alternative to valuing the stock, and this really, these next couple of slides really come from, I think it's chapter 7. An alternative to valuing the stock per share is valuing the entire firm. This value can be used to come up with an alternative method for valuing the stock. We're not going to use that other method, but if you understand the concept, it's really easy from where we stop to get to another value per share. So valuing the steps that you take is valuing the entire firm using an operating free cash flow model, which means we're going to have to develop this operating free cash flow, which we will in just a sec. Second, subtract the book value of the debt. This is the part we're not going to do. We're not going to subtract from that total firm value the book value of all the debt, giving me the economic value of just the equity. And then you divide that equity by the number of shares. So these last two are fairly straightforward. You just subtract out all of the debt from the balance sheet, which is pretty close to the actual value of that debt and what you'd have to do to pay it off right now, and then divide what's left by the number of shares, and voila, you end up with a stock price. So here's how we're going to value the entire firm, just the entire value of the firm, both debt and equity. So we're going to be looking at the current value of the firm, which should be the present value of all expected future operating free cash flows. And I want to stress that operating component because we've talked about cash flow when we looked at the equity valuation model, and we looked at the free cash flow to the equity holder. At this point, we're looking at free cash flows to all investors. And that's really what we're looking at. And so we have this just present value, V sub 0, value of the firm at time 0, is equal to and we're going to be taking each expected operating free cash flow and discounting them at the weighted average cost of capital. Depends on how far out they are as to what that T value is, and then we'll add them all up, and that will be the value of the firm right now. Now the operating cash flows this time must be discounted using the weighted average cost of capital, not the return to the equity holder. In most instances, we assume that N, the life of the investment, approaches infinity because we assume that the company is going to be around for a very, very, very long time. With this introduction, we're going to focus our attention at this point on those free cash flows, operating free cash flows. And so here we go. And this jumps all the way back to chapter 2. There are a couple of things that we're going to be doing all the way back to chapter 2. So we're kind of blending chapters 9, 7, and 2 at this point, so bear with us. So note that the free cash flow, what I call operating free cash flow, is an estimate of cash flow. This is not actual cash flow, it's an estimate. And people think this is the precise free cash flow. No, it's an estimate of cash flow. It's based on what appears to be free. meaning that it is available for distribution to all investors after making any necessary investments to support operations. But it can be a little misleading, because if managers buy what people call perks with the money, it might look like they're reinvesting, when in fact you and I both know they're not. They're just sort of partying with the company money. So we should be looking at the actual free cash flows. But that's not what it measures. It will do an approximation based on the accounting, and the accounting doesn't necessarily do a good job of saying this is actual reinvestment and this isn't. So projecting it is extremely difficult, since we have not accounted for all differences between the financial accounting, the tax accounting, and the company's financial statements. And because of that, we can't hit it right on, and so it's going to be guesstimated going forward. I hate to say it, but it is. I'm going to go through these steps. We're going to do them a couple of different ways. We'll look at the actual, and then we'll look at the projections, because the projections will give us we'll need to use the projections to get to the value of the firm, whereas the actuals will just tell us how they've done in the past, and it helps us practice these. These first two are very conceptual. And having said that, people will want a list, and they'll want to go down and check their list, and that's not the way these work. We're going to be estimating the firm's operating current assets. Now this is, again, trying to get to free cash flow. This is the very first step. We're going to be looking at operating current assets. Now, operating current assets are those current assets which are used and needed to support the core operations of the business. My company that I've been using all semester long makes shoes and boots. So we're just looking at current assets that are used in boot and shoe making. Anything that says tax this, that, the other, like, taxes receivable, I don't need to do that to make shoes and boots, or sell them for that matter. So that one doesn't count as an operating current asset. So what should be included? Well, cash should, unless it says restricted cash. I've actually seen some that do. I'll talk about that in a sec. Inventory clearly should be, because you can't sell from an empty bin, so to speak. Receivables, yeah, that's needed to actually do the business of making and selling shoes. What should be excluded? Short-term investments, that's a short-term financing issue. Has nothing to do with operations. Taxes shouldn't be, if there's something that says tax, blah, 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 blah. In the current assets, probably shouldn't be there either. It should also not include restricted cash, because restricted cash is usually used as a way of financing. So if you get a bank loan, sometimes they'll say you have to restrict so much cash. In other words, you hold it in an account and you don't ever use it. Well, then it can't be operating cash flow. It's got to be used there. It's only used is so that I can get a loan, and so that's what it's there for. It's a loan. It's financing. It's not an operating asset. Let me go from here, and we'll just build these slowly as we go through them. I'm going to look first at the historical, then we'll look at the projections. This is Rocky Brands, and we're looking at their income statement right now, but I think I'm going to move over to ratios on this one to start building my cash flow issues. So I'm going to do free cash flow, and tell it I want the OCA, and we will indent this one. Going to make that one stand out by making it bold, and then note these are going backwards again, 2013 back to 2008. I'm going to start by saying, I'm just going to list them, so I'm going to say equal. These are all off the balance sheet, so I'm moving to the balance sheet and scrolling up to my current assets. And we're going to be in 2013 because that's where I hit my equal. And the very first one says cash. That one was duh. That one was listed in the list of you want to include it. And so were accounts receivable, although mine says trade receivables. That's okay. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Plus other receivables. That might include tax receivables and other things. So I'm just going to leave that alone and say that's not part of it. So I'm going to move down to inventories. And then there are income tax receivables. Well, so the other receivables probably didn't have any of those in them. Deferred income taxes and prepaid expenses. And I'm thinking prepaid expenses could go either way, but deferred income taxes and income tax receivables are almost certainly no. So I'm going to just go for not including prepaid expenses. Depends on what they were prepaid for. But I'm going to say enter. I'm going to widen this a bit. Wow, I don't know. Oh, I do too know why. So I'm going to get rid of my extra decimal points, and then pull this the rest of the way across to 2008. These should work all the way through. And if I highlight and double click, I should be able to see all of them. These are my projections, and the problem that I have with my projections is they're getting unwieldy. So I'm going to put in another heading here that just says stock price estimation, and then merge and center. I'm going to bold it and get it to be the same as this one up here, which it looks like it's 14, so I'm going to pop back down there and change it to be 14 as well. I'm going to scroll up here a bit. This stuff right down here at the bottom is extra stuff that I think I put way down here thinking I'd never go down this far. Never say never. And so I'm going to highlight those and just insert. I don't want to get rid of them because I don't know, they may be tied to something, and so I'm trying to be kind to myself. And at this point I'm going to say I'm now looking at free cash flow, and again I'm going to highlight and merge and center. I know that this is going to be 14, and unfortunately for me looks like we shifted from Times New Roman. Well, I really, as you know, don't necessarily like Times New Roman, but just to be more consistent, I think we're going to go for Times New Roman anyway, because that just looks weird. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at OCA, which is operating current assets. I keep wanting to say cash flow, and it's not it. It's operating current assets. This is going to be equal to, and we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to go over to balance sheet. We're going to be looking for cash and equivalent plus trade receivables plus inventory. We've already made these same decisions, so we don't have to come up with anything really radical. I'm going to make that bold, unbold, and then go through here and just pull those across. I think since we're having this bold issue, I come down here and make sure I don't have bold on any of these by just turning it on, turning it back off. There we go. Step 1B, estimate the firm's operating current liabilities. Now again, this is going to work the same way. Operating current liabilities are the current liabilities that arise naturally as part of the operations. And in my operations, that means they make shoes and boots. It does not mean that they go out and borrow money. It doesn't mean that they do anything else. What happens just as a natural consequence of making shoes and boots, period. What happens, and the ones that actually are operating current liabilities, should include things like accounts receivable, many of the accruals such as salaries and wages, commissions, and all that sort of thing, because I know that mine has both of those. At the same time, anything that has to do with financing, and if you can visualize an income statement as you get through operations, that's what we're talking about. Anything that would flow in there, we're talking about, as long as it's a current liability kind of thing, current asset kind of thing. But if there are things in there that would generally come out in below the operating income line, such as taxes, such as interest, such as special things other than operations, then it's not operations. I'm hoping that makes some sense to those of you who are more accounting, have a more of accounting bent. OCL. The OCL should exclude any short-term financing since it's not part of operations. That means we should exclude current maturity of long-term debt. That should not be part of this. Notes payable should not be part of this. Any accrued interest should not be part of this. Anything that says income tax, anything should not be part of this. And therefore, let me give you the two examples. The one is past, the other one is future. Here we are in the past. I feel like I'm doing the Christmas Carol all of a sudden, because now we're doing Rocky Shoe and Boot past, and here we go. We're going to say equal. Again, we're going to the balance sheet, and we're going to be looking at accounts payable plus salaries and wages plus accrued freight, that makes some sense, plus commissions, that makes some sense, plus this company actually does a lot of their stuff in the Dominican Republic, a lot of their work in the Dominican Republic, I shouldn't say stuff. And as such, the accrued duty might be, but I noticed that it's only been reported in the last year, so I think I'm going to ignore it, because it was probably embedded somewhere in other before that, and I just don't know how much it is, and I don't want it to be biased, and so I'm just going to say, well, that's probably all I can do for right now. Enter. And it's telling me, whoops, I think you meant not to put that plus on, and I'm going, that's right, you guessed correctly, bully for you. And so at this point we're going to pull that one across and move down a couple as we come up with the, actually I guess we don't need to because this is all built together. And so with that intro though, we should be looking at the projections. So OCL, we're going to say is equal to, and I'm going to do the same thing probably completely, although in this instance I do have accrued duty all the way across. I think I'm just going to ignore that one here too, just to be consistent. So we're going to do accounts payable plus salaries and wages plus accrued freight plus commissions, and that's probably about it. Enter, and then we're going to pull that one the rest of the way across. And it doesn't move around, it's not projected to move around a lot, just a little. And then that's it. Next phase, we're going to be looking at what's called net operating working capital, NOWC. NOWC is the operating current assets minus the operating current liabilities. Well, that should be fairly straightforward. By the way, what this is trying to look at is it's looking at the net short-term investment in operations, the stuff that we need to do just to make the business work. So I'm going to say NOWC, which sounds like it's telling you that they have no toilet if you're into the European way of saying toilet. It's WC. Looks like it says no WC here. So they're going to have to invest. Oh, this is driving me nuts. Let's do this. I'm going to copy, and we're going to paste through all of this stuff. I'm going to paste special, and we're going to paste formats, and I'm tired of doing that. There we go. Now I shouldn't have that problem anymore. So I'm going to pull that all the way, rest of the way across, and I should be in a happier state. Now my projections, NOWC. equals the big one minus the small one. And I just realized that we have the same weird thing going on here, and so we're going to format those as well. And now we're going to pull that one across. There we go. And that takes us into step number 2. Actually, this takes us into step number 1D, excuse me. That takes us into step 1D, which is estimate the total net operating capital, the TNOC. This TNOC becomes an important measure, by the way, and it's trying to get all of the assets that are needed to actually run the core business, the boots, the shoes, that sort of thing. So we're going to be looking at the NOWC, and then we're going to add what's called net fixed asset. Those are fixed assets. That's property, plant, and equipment. Sometimes it's listed as PP&E. Net of depreciation. So that's why it will usually be listed as PP&E net, or property, plant, and equipment net, or fixed assets net. We'll look for all of those magic words, and if you don't see them, they probably still have some fixed assets, and you need to say what would be longer term assets net of depreciation and try to figure out which line that is. So never give up. Again, TNOC represents the total net investment made by capital investors in the firm. That's why we're trying to find out what that is. So TNOC. Oops, I need to indent, don't I? Wow, why don't I just pop down here and indent them all again? There we go. And we're going to say is equal to the net operating working capital plus, go to the balance sheet, and scroll up until you find fixed assets net. And we're doing that for 2013 because that's the column I'm in. And there we have our number. And now I'm going back to my projections. And we'll do TNOC equals, again, my free cash flows plus, going to balance sheet, scroll up until I find fixed assets. Enter. And pull the rest of the way across. This one is going down, which is kind of weird, but yeah, I'm projecting sales that aren't doing stellar. Yes, and all of that was just in step 1. Step 1 is just looking at capital issues, and now we have to start looking at step 2. Step 2 has nothing to do with step 1, so bear with us as we make it through here. Step 2, calculate the net operating profit after tax, NOPAT. Now NOPAT is just the EBIT times 1 minus T. EBIT meaning earnings before interest and taxes times 1 minus the tax rate. Now EBIT, the way I always calculated it, was operating earnings. Please open your mind to words that say operating earnings. I feel like I'm doing one of those Jedi mind tricks. Open your mind to operating earnings. Okay, that's what I'm hoping that you'll do, because a lot of you will look for just those magic words. Stop it or I'll slap you. Okay, so we're not looking for magic words. We're looking for something that says either earnings, operating earnings, or income from operations, or something similar as a line, sort of as the right before we get to stuff that has nothing to do with operations. Then we're going to multiply that by 1 minus T. Just because this is a different area, I'm going to do NOPAT. And I'm going to move over here and say, let's see, that's equal to income statement. Scroll up until I get something that looks like it says income from operations. That sounds like operating earnings times 1 minus the tax rate. Now, I did a tax rate earlier, and I called it the average tax rate, and I'm just going to use the average. For when I projected, I used the overall average for these years, but I'm just using that one here, so that's going to have to work. Yeah, I forgot to put my closing parenthesis on. It says, do you want me to finish that for you? And I'm saying, yeah, thanks. I'm going to pull that across. And by the way, this last one, I don't have anything on it, but that's going to be irrelevant anyway. I'm not going to actually use this one because of something that comes afterwards. What I mean by that, for those of you who weren't paying really close attention, if you look at the income statement G68, I have a blank. And I saw that, but I also know that I'm not going to need that particular observation, so I could actually get rid of it just to be safe. Now, to the projections. The projections, we're going to do no pat on. We're going to say equals. We're already on the income statement, so I'm going to go up to my income from operations times 1 minus 0.3629. And you're going to say, where in the heck did that come from? Just a sec. Probably got it wrong anyway. It's probably 3659 or some bizarre thing, but I'm going to find out real quickly. I'm going to scroll back up here and say, what did I use for an income tax expense? You'll see that it says 3269. Wow, I was completely off. 3269. So I'm going to come down here and say, well, I am dyslexic. I actually am. So there you go. 3269. I'm going to pull those across. And that leads us to our favorite, finally, the free cash flow estimate, which is going to be, we're going to use NOPAT plus impairment, if there's any impairment, minus net investment in operating capital. And this net investment in operating capital is hard for people to conceptualize. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take those total net operating capital for this period, subtract out the stuff that we had the period before. Why? Because we had to use some of our cash flow to finance that net operating capital, and therefore it wasn't free. So I'm going back here and saying, what is my FCFO? I keep doing that. It drives me nuts. So highlight my O, and then tell it subscript. I'm going to say equals. What we need to do to begin with is the NOPAT. Going to add back anything on the cash flow statement that looks like impairment. There's the word impairment right there, intangible impairment. If you see any others, we'll add those back too. These are things that cost me money but didn't have anything to do with actual cash, and I don't see impairment anywhere else. So I'm going to say minus, going back to my ratios. This is why we did this in the first place, by the way. We're going to say this period, which is the most recent period, minus the period before. And I'm going to then say close parenthesis because I don't want it yelling at me, and enter. That one's negative. Why? Because I only had $7.5 million in NOPAT, and I was trying to cover my needs in my TNOC, which went from 127 to 143. Ouch. That's a lot of extra stuff that I had to come up with, and so I actually have a 8229, $8.2 million shortfall that year. But the year before I had a almost $9.2 million surplus, so that's good. This one I had a huge amount of surplus, but that's because we went from TNOC that was huge down to not so huge. And by the way, if you were wondering why did I stop here, it wasn't just because of that one. it was because I needed an extra observation in the TNOC, which is why I said I don't need to fill that one in. I could have filled this one in. I just didn't have the tax rate there, but I could easily have gotten it. I stopped here because I don't have any more TNOCs going back. On to the projections. So FCFO, except I keep hitting the wrong key. Again, we're going to be saying is equal to, no Pat? I'm not projecting any impairment, so I don't need to worry about that one, so I'm going to skip it and go straight to my difference between now. Oh, hang on, I don't have the then. I need to copy these. Before I copy these, I want to show you what I'm doing. I need to pick up the 2013 TNOC so I can actually get the difference. So I'm going to copy this because it has all of the right rows and stuff in the formulas. And I'm going to point out that over here on my balance sheet I actually have the actual 2013. I used it to project, so I have it out here in column I. And I'm copying from column F to column I. Hope that makes sense, because that's all I'm going to make. That's the only adjustments I'm going to make. So I'm on F. I highlight them, I hit copy, and I move out to I and hit paste, or hit enter in this case. Then I'm going to go over here and do my FCFO, which is equal to, no Pat, let me do this one last time, minus parenthesis TNOC this time, minus TNOC last time. I'm going to close my parenthesis, hit enter. I made $22 million, at least that's projected. The reason for that is because this TNOC is going down drastically. I don't know how realistic that is. I can't pull this across because it's going to actually do relative addresses, so we'll look at this one and then do this one minus this one, which is definitely not correct. So I'm going to say equal, no Pat, minus TNOC for 2015 minus no TNOC for the year before, which actually is going in the other direction in this instance. So I'm going to put in closing parenthesis, enter, and then I'm going to pull that the rest of the way across. At this point, we're going to be splitting our interpretation of both weighted average cost of capital and free cash flow. Well, not so much free cash flow, but at least this discussion of free cash flow, because there's a place where we're going to come back up and hit these two items, sort of the precursors of free cash flow when we look in the past. And I want to do some looking at what does this mean as far as the value of this firm is concerned, looking at the projections. And so we have these projections. That's what these are. These are projections. And I want to now take a quick look at what this means as far as value is concerned. That means we have to go first back to the lecture. We'd like to value the entire firm. Again, I know this one is a slide I swear I've used now 3 times. Third time's the charm, though. Current value of the firm, V sub 0, is still the present value of the expected future operating free cash flows. So we're going to be taking this V sub 0, we're going to take all of my expected free cash flows, which I've now created, and we're going to discount them using the weighted average cost of capital. We're going to do this the same way we did the stock, only we're not going to get a stock price, we're going to get millions of dollars to essentially value the entire firm, both the debt and the equity. How much is it worth? The operating cash flows this time are going to be discounted using the weighted average cost of capital because we're using all of the cash flows. So in all of these instances, or in most instances, that n at the top there is going to be going to infinity, and because of that we're going to adjust and do the same sort of thing that we did when we valued the stock, because it also went out to infinity. So let me review what we did there, not with the slides, because I don't want to put you to sleep, because we're almost finished with this chapter, and I know you're on the verge of falling asleep, but really just looking at what did we do to actually get those. So I'm going to go back out to Excel, and then I'm going to scroll up and say, where did I get this stuff? So let's see. I had my projected free cash flows per share. I needed a long-term growth rate, still do. I need a discount rate, still do, but I already have it. It's the weighted average cost of capital. I need a P5, because that's going to have all of the value at time 5 of everything from time 6 to infinity. Then I take my original cash flows, and in the last one I will add specifically the cash flow that comes at time 5 and add the P5 to it. The price, all the stuff that goes from time 6 to infinity, I'm going to add to it. And then I'm going to discount all of that using my appropriate discount rate. So I'm going to come down here and do the same exact thing, only in this instance I'm going to have to say, okay, to begin with, what is the growth rate? And actually, let me call this the long-term growth rate, and this is in free cash flows, by the way. So I'm going to assume again 2.00%. Then I'm going to come down a little bit further and say, now that we've got that one in, what else did we need to know? We needed to know the discount rate. I'm going to do two different discount rates here. I'm going to do the weighted average cost of capital, the levered and unlevered weighted average cost of capital. So I'm going to pop over to my other Excel sheet, and I'm going to grab these two. I really want the headings, and the easiest way of doing this is in two stages, unfortunately. Otherwise I'd like to grab all of them and bring them over, but this subscript is not allowing me to do that. And I'm going to enter them. And I'm going to go back and get the weighted average cost of capital. I'm going to copy, and I'm going to paste special. I'm going to choose values and number formats. Next to that, I'm going to do my V5, and I'm going to grab my 5 and subscript it. This is the same thing as the P5 before. I'm going to copy. By the way, if you try to pull this down, it will go to V6 for sure, which is not my idea. So I'm going to, at this point, use my Gordon growth model, which I have in my head, equals the last FCF times 1 plus G Actually, you know what? I think I'm going to go back and hit an F4 on that one so that I get everything that's different. Then we're going to divide by parenthesis weighted average cost of capital minus G. Now I've got this set up in such a way that I have the only little thing that's going to adjust is that weighted average cost of capital number. That's going to adjust as I pull it down. So I'm going to hit enter. I got 305 million, and I've got 216 million using a higher cost of capital discount factor. Now I'm going to move down, and I'm going to say cash flow for discounting
In fact, at this point, you can, if you look up at the top, you can see we're almost there. But we're doing this now twice. I'm going to be doing the levered, and now we're going to be doing the unlevered as soon as I can grab this and pull it down and make my little adjustment. In this instance, I'm grabbing my free cash flows, and I'm going to pull that over to here. And then on this one, actually before I do that, I really should have put a $sign in front of the 71, excuse me. So let me go back on top of that one and just get it in front of the 71 and do this one more time. And then on this one, I'm going to say plus V5. I'm setting this up in such a way so that I can highlight these and just pull it down one, and it will keep this row and we'll move to the other V5. If you're wondering why I have a $sign in front of the 71 but not in front of the 75, that's by design. Enter, highlight those, and pull them down, and we have a little less there because it's 9 plus that, which is 226, 613, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So at this point, now we need to do VO, levered, meaning with debt in its capital structure. I'm going to pop up and pull down, and then on this last one, I'm going to say unlevered. And for, whoops, I forgot, shoot. So I'm going to, I forgot to subscript that puppy. What a goof. So now we're going to say equal NPV, and my discount rate is that one, comma, my cash flows are those. I have not put $signs in front of anything because I don't want them in front of anything. Close parenthesis, enter. And now I'm going to just pull that one down because it should do everything correctly at this point. So I'm going to hit my F2 key, and you can see that it picked up the right. Unlevered, and I've got these backwards, so I need to fix them. That's why I'm going, what? I got those backwards, so I'm going to have to fix those. But yeah, that's easily done. But it's picking up the unlevered and the unlevered. So I'm going to hit enter and go back here and fix these. What a goofball I am. So unlevered and levered. There we go. Note we have about $80 million more in firm value just because we chose to use some debt in our capital structure. That's not money to sneeze at, by the way. So that's why many companies have debt, is because they're worth more that way. I'm hoping that that made sense. That's one of the big reasons I even do this. That's this one. Now, one last little concept, and it's from the historical stuff. It's called economic value added. I always thought, well, maybe the textbook doesn't have this anymore, but it did. It had it back in chapter 2. Economic value added attempts to measure the marginal improvement in the value of the firm due to the operations of the firm. So EVA, economic value added, is the NOPAT minus TNOC times weighted average cost of capital. So I'm going to have to bring, historically, my weighted average cost of capital over so I can actually use it. And then everything else should be there. So let's go get my weighted average cost of capital to begin with. I'm bringing the, in this instance, I can bring the label and the number. I'm just going to hit copy. And I'm going to move down here and say paste special values, values in number formats. Okay. And I'm going to skip a couple lines and say EVA, economic value added, which is going to be equal to NOPAT, that's how much we actually did make, minus TNOC times weighted average cost of capital. Now I'm going to assume that that's going to be held constant, so I'm going to just hold it constant as I pull this across in just a sec. Now note, we didn't make, essentially what this is doing is it's saying here's how much you made, and this times that is how much you had to make just to stay even. We fell short, and therefore we fell short probably by about enough to be, you know, but we fell short essentially, and so we didn't make the money that we should have. I'm going to pull this across. Here we added 2.4 million to the value of the firm, 2.2 million, 5.2 million, and there we lost less than 750,000. So there have been a couple of losses, but overall this company has been adding to the value of the firm. And if we highlight all of these, you can see on average we add $1.8 million to the value of the firm by operating the firm, because we're actually getting more in return than is required by both debt and equity investors. So we're actually, over time, adding slightly to the value of the firm. That's what EVA is supposed to be picking up, and this is driving me nuts, so let me indent. There we go. Hope that made some sense. I'm going to ask you to do all of the things that I've done, obviously, in this homework assignment, which means adding all this junk to the past, adding all that similar junk to your projections, and telling me what it all means. And I'll see you in the next chapter, I guess.